on the May 31st, 2026, 9:12 in the morning London time. Lots of international news cameras are already set up and waiting outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. And then Catherine, the Princess of Wales, steps out of her vehicle alone to deliver a press conference, and that was the beginning of Camilla's misery. No King Charles beside her, no Prince William. Just Catherine, stepping out of that car, straightening herself, and walking alone toward the microphones with the kind of composure that tells you this moment was rehearsed 100 times in private. Welcome to Royal Decode by Imah, where the royal tea is always fresh, hot, and served at the perfect temperature. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. She delivered a statement that, on the surface, sounded like a routine announcement about financial transparency within the monarchy. But if you actually listened, not just to what she said, but to how she said it, which words she chose, which phrases she emphasized, you would immediately understand that this was not a press conference. This was a legal maneuver, executed live, in front of every camera in the world. Her exact words: "The crown only holds value when it represents absolute transparency. Starting at midnight tonight, the entire royal charitable system will undergo a full independent forensic audit. Any undocumented funds will be immediately frozen. We do not protect mistakes in the dark. We bring them into the light." 38 seconds. That was all it took. The mainstream press called it a progressive step forward, a modernization effort, a bold commitment to accountability, clean, positive optics, the kind of headline that gets written and forgotten by the next news cycle. But what actually happened the moment those words left her mouth was something the headlines completely failed to capture. She formally triggered a financial freeze across the entire royal household, every discretionary fund, every charitable channel, every quiet operational account that had been humming along beneath the surface for years. And that freeze was not random. It was not broad reform for the sake of good governance. It was precision targeted, surgically designed, to hit a specific financial structure that Queen Camilla had been operating privately for a very long time. That line about not protecting mistakes in the dark, that was not poetic language chosen for dramatic effect. That was a direct message, addressed to one specific person. And everyone inside those palace walls, every aide, every advisor, every senior member of staff who understood how this institution actually functions, knew exactly who that message was for the moment they heard it. Now here is what makes this even more remarkable, and what the cameras outside the palace completely missed. She did this alone. Think about that for a moment. No king standing beside her to validate the announcement. No heir to the throne lending his authority to the moment. Just Catherine, at those microphones, by herself. And that choice was entirely deliberate. In royal protocol, who stands beside you when you speak is not a logistical detail. It is a statement. It communicates hierarchy. It communicates backing. It communicates where the real authority in the room sits. By showing up without Charles or William, Catherine was not speaking as a supporting family member. She was not speaking as a princess deferring to the men above her in the line of succession. She was projecting independent authority. She was signaling to everyone inside those palace walls and everyone watching at home that she is not waiting for permission from anyone anymore. That is a shift, a very significant one. And it happened quietly, in plain sight, in front of 50 cameras, and almost no one in the mainstream press commented on it. While all of that was unfolding publicly in London, something very different was playing out approximately 70 miles away, in the quiet Wiltshire countryside. Queen Camilla was at the Mill estate, the private property she has long used as a retreat from the pressures of royal life. It is a beautiful, secluded place, the kind of property that feels insulated from the world. On this particular morning, that seclusion became something else entirely. By 11 o'clock, sources described the estate as having entered a complete lockdown. No staff movement in or out, no communications going through normal palace channels, no press, no visitors. The kind of silence that does not feel peaceful, it feels deliberate. And then, at some point after Catherine's statement went live on televisions across the world, a single vehicle pulled slowly into the driveway of that Wiltshire estate. Inside, it was a senior legal advisor representing Prince William, carrying a secured folder containing what palace insiders are now referring to as the silent contract. Let me be very clear about what this document was and what it was not. This was not a polite letter. This was not a gentle suggestion. This was not a family request for Camilla to consider easing back her responsibilities out of consideration for the good of the institution. This was a binding legal agreement, with zero room for negotiation. and the terms written inside it were by any measure extreme. By signing it, Camilla would forfeit her right to speak in any official capacity without prior approval from Catherine's team. Every single public statement she makes from that point forward, every piece of official correspondence, every confirmed engagement, every press interaction, every response to media inquiries, all of it would have to pass through Catherine's communications office before it could go anywhere. But it went even further than that. The personal network she spent 30 years carefully constructing, the media relationships cultivated over decades, the charitable patronage structures she had built from the ground up, the strategic alliances she had maintained and expanded throughout her time as Duchess of Cornwall and then Queen Consort, all of it would be formally dismantled the moment her pen touched those pages. 3 decades of work, gone in a single signature. And right now, you are probably sitting there thinking, why would she ever agree to that? She is the Queen Consort. In the current formal hierarchy of the British royal family, she outranks Catherine significantly. What kind of leverage could William possibly have that would make a sitting queen agree to terms like those? The answer is a number: $12,450,000. When forensic accountants were given access to the royal financial ledgers as part of the preliminary audit review, what they uncovered was a financial operation that had been running quietly inside the charitable arm of the Duchy of Cornwall for years, possibly longer than anyone is currently willing to say publicly. The mechanics of it were sophisticated enough that they would have passed a standard internal review without raising a single flag. Small administrative grants would be approved through official channels for what appeared to be standard operational costs, completely routine. The kind of line items that appear in institutional budgets everywhere and get rubber stamped without a second look. But instead of those funds reaching their intended public recipients, specific allocations were being quietly redirected into a secondary intermediary trust, a holding structure that sat one step removed from the primary charitable accounts, far enough to avoid automatic oversight, close enough to access quickly. From that holding account, the money was then dispersed across a network of unlisted charities and independent organizations, organizations that shared one thing in common. Every single one of them was exclusively connected to Camilla's private patronage, circle, institutional money, flowing through a closed loop, financing her private networking, her public relations infrastructure, her media alliances, and the steady, quiet expansion of her personal sphere of influence within the establishment. All of it hidden from standard palace oversight, all of it undetectable to anyone who was not specifically looking for it. When the paper trail was finally decoded in full, when the transactions were mapped, the intermediary structures traced, and the destination accounts identified, the documentation was, by all accounts, airtight. And that documentation was sitting inside the folder that William's legal advisor placed on the table at Raymill Estate that morning. MID Story CTA. Before we go any further, if you are finding this story as fascinating as I did when I first went down this rabbit hole, do me a quick favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is still developing, and the next video in this series is going to go even deeper into what happened behind the scenes of that Privy Council session, and what those Box 11 documents actually contained. You do not want to miss that one, and while you are at it, drop a comment below. Tell me, do you think Catherine planned this from the beginning? Or did the audit simply give her the opening she had been waiting for? Now let's get back to it, because it gets even more intense from here. The choice Camilla was presented with inside that quiet Wiltshire estate was not subtle. There was no middle ground being offered, no grace period, no room to negotiate alternative terms, sign the contract, keep the title, lose every piece of actual power behind it, or refuse, and watch everything unravel publicly in the most damaging way imaginable. Under the UK Charities Act of 2011, deliberately misdirecting charitable trust funds is not a civil matter. It is not a reputational problem to be managed through a well-crafted press release. It is a serious criminal offense, the kind that triggers external regulatory investigations, that results in assets being frozen by authorities outside the palace's control, that produces court proceedings conducted in full public view. If Camilla refused to sign, the complete financial records would be handed to investigators and then unsealed for the global press. Every routing number, every transaction date, every organization that received redirected money, every individual connected to those organizations. The resulting public inquiry would not just embarrass Camilla personally, It would pull the institution itself into the wreckage, and the palace would be institutionally obligated to distance itself entirely, leaving her without a single layer of protection from whatever legal consequences followed. That is the corner she was backed into, and the people who designed it knew exactly what they were doing. There was also a timing element layered on top of all of this that made the pressure even more acute. At 1:45 that same afternoon, the Privy Council was scheduled to convene for a mandatory session to officially approve and seal the royal household's budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Now, if you are not familiar with how that process works, when the Privy Council approves a royal budget, that document becomes a permanent sealed state record. It is not something that can be quietly amended afterward. It is not something that gets reviewed again on a Tuesday when it becomes inconvenient. Once it is signed, it is locked. And here is the problem. If William had allowed that session to proceed with a $12 million discrepancy still sitting unaddressed inside the financial ledger, the monarchy would not just be managing an internal family problem anymore. By formally approving a compromised financial document and entering it into permanent state record, the institution itself would become legally entangled in whatever had created that discrepancy. That is a different category of problem entirely. That is not a family matter, that is a constitutional exposure. So the window was extraordinarily narrow. The confrontation at Raymil had to happen that morning, not that afternoon, not the following day after everyone had time to think. That morning, before 1:45, before that session convened, before the ledger was sealed and the opportunity to correct it disappeared permanently. William executed it to the minute. The legal advisor arrived at Raymil, placed the documents on the table, and then turned around and walked out. Camilla was left sitting alone in the quiet of that Wiltshire estate with one folder on the table in front of her, a ticking clock, and the full weight of what was inside those pages pressing down on every minute of silence. At 3:30 that afternoon, a short bulletin was released from the Royal Press Office, unusually short, 4 lines. The kind of brevity that is itself a signal to anyone paying attention. The key sentence read, "Due to sudden and unforeseen health complications requiring an extended period of rest, the Queen Consort will be stepping back from all official public duties for the foreseeable future." If you follow royal media with any regularity, you know exactly what that language means. Sudden health complications is the single most effective phrase in the royal communications playbook. It is bulletproof. The press cannot push back on a medical announcement without appearing to attack a sick woman. The public does not demand timelines or press conferences when someone is unwell. There is no mechanism for accountability built into that framing. No natural opening for follow-up questions, no angle for journalists to pull on without looking heartless. It is a door that closes completely and permanently the moment it is used. And here is the detail that matters most about that statement. It was not written by Camilla's communications team. As of that morning, her team no longer held the authority to issue statements on her behalf. That statement was written, approved, and released by Catherine's office. The message announcing Camilla's removal from public life was crafted by the person who engineered that removal. Think about the precision of that for a moment. Now, a question worth sitting with. If the financial evidence against Camilla was as definitive as sources are describing, why not remove the title entirely? Why allow her to remain queen consort in even a ceremonial capacity? Why go through the complexity of the silent contract rather than simply severing her position publicly? The answer comes back to King Charles, and it makes complete sense when you think through the full picture. A full public removal of the queen consort title, particularly one triggered by a financial scandal with direct ties to the Duchy of Cornwall, charitable arm, would have been a catastrophic blow to Charles's reign, not just politically, personally, historically. The image of a sitting monarch whose own wife was caught quietly redirecting millions from charitable funds connected directly to his household is not a story you manage through careful press strategy. It is not a crisis you ride out with a few weeks of good optics. It is the kind of story that permanently defines a reign. That becomes the first paragraph of how that reign is remembered. That follows the institution into the history books. So by allowing Camilla to keep the title on paper, to remain queen consort in name, visible at state occasions, still photographed and waved from official vehicles, the institution protects Charles from that outcome. The public sees a supportive king navigating a private family health matter with quiet dignity and grace. They see continuity, stability, a palace that handles its difficulties internally and with discretion. They do not see what is actually underneath that surface. And that gap between what is publicly visible and what is actually happening is not an accidental byproduct of the situation. It is the entire point. It was designed specifically to exist. What Camilla's daily life now actually looks like, when you strip away the ceremonial surface and look at the mechanics of it, is genuinely remarkable to consider. She still has the title. She will still appear at state dinners. She will still wear the jewelry, smile for cameras, wave from cars, and be photographed standing beside the king at official engagements. But every single word she says publicly will have been reviewed and approved by Catherine's communications office before it reaches anyone outside the palace. Every engagement she attends will have been selected and scheduled by William's team. Every visitor to her residence requires advanced security clearance. Her private communications are now routed through internal palace servers with active oversight from Catherine's operation. Every call logged, every email tracked, every movement accounted for. One source described the arrangement using a phrase that stuck with me when I first heard it: a highly monitored glass cage. The visual presentation of power is maintained perfectly. The actual mechanics of power have been completely extracted from behind it. 30 years of carefully built influence. A network of relationships and alliances constructed over 3 decades at the highest levels of British public life, compressed overnight into a ceremonial image that someone else is now curating and managing on her behalf. I genuinely cannot think of a more complete reversal of position, not in this institution, not in this era, and throughout this entire day. From the moment Catherine walked to those microphones at 9 in the morning to the moment that Health Bulletin went out at 3:30 in the afternoon, there was one absence that, when you notice it, tells you more about the current reality inside the royal household than anything else on that list. King Charles was nowhere. He did not issue a statement defending his wife. He did not intervene when the legal ultimatum was delivered to Raymil. He did not appear publicly. He did not hold a press conference. He did not even make an indirect acknowledgement through aides that he was aware of what was unfolding. For a man who wears the crown of the British monarchy, for a man whose entire life has been defined by the weight of that institution, the silence was deafening. Internal sources indicate he was fully briefed on the contents of the financial audit before any of this was set in motion publicly. He knew what was in the folder that arrived at Raymil. He understood what the silent contract contained. He understood what his son was doing and why, and he also understood something else. If he used his sovereign authority to intervene, if he stepped in to protect Camilla from the consequences of what the audit had uncovered, William was prepared to let those financial discrepancies become a public matter. Charles was trapped, with no exit that did not cost him something enormous. Protecting his wife meant triggering a public scandal that could permanently damage both his reign and the institutional credibility of the monarchy. He has spent his entire life preparing to lead. Staying silent meant watching the woman he chose to make his queen, the relationship he waited decades to make official, have everything stripped from her autonomy without a single word of deference from him. He chose the institution. He chose the crown over the person closest to him, and he spent the night quietly inside his private quarters while his son and daughter-in-law methodically dismantled everything she had spent 30 years building. That is not a small thing. That is a king who has already ceded the real operational authority of his household to the next generation. And everyone inside those palace walls understands exactly what that signals for how the coming years are going to look. Around 5 o'clock that evening, as the light was beginning to soften over London, and the city was winding into its early evening rhythm, one final detail emerged that people paying very close attention to the palace picked up on. The personal standard of the Princess of Wales was raised on the roof of Kensington Palace. Most people walking through the area that evening probably saw it and thought nothing of it. Standards go up, standards come down. It is a routine part of the visual language of royal London. But within royal protocol, raising a personal standard is never casual. It communicates presence, it communicates authority. It marks a moment. Raising the Princess of Wales' standard at the close of that specific day, after everything that had just been executed from within those walls, was a deliberate punctuation mark. A quiet, visible, completely deniable statement that required no words and left no fingerprints. It said, "This is where the power sits now." Catherine has been a part of this family for 15 years. She came in as an outsider, a middle-class girl from Berkshire entering one of the most scrutinized institutions on earth. She absorbed an extraordinary amount of internal tension, external pressure, and public criticism over those years. She never broke publicly. She never gave the press the crisis they were always looking for. She never responded in kind when the institution tested her patience or her dignity. And she spent every single one of those 15 years watching, learning, understanding how this institution actually functions beneath its polished ceremonial surface, where the real leverage lies, which mechanisms carry genuine weight and which ones are purely theater, which relationships matter and which ones are managed purely for optics. What happened on May 31st, 2026 was the result of all of that accumulated understanding. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not a public blowup that gave the tabloids a field day. A clean, quiet, invisible, completely deniable transfer of operational control, executed so precisely that the general public will almost certainly never fully grasp what actually took place. The official story that went out to the world is that the monarchy is stable, united, and graciously managing a private health matter within the family, with the dignity and discretion that the institution has always prided itself on. And that story holds up perfectly, because there is genuinely nothing visible on the surface to contradict it. No fingerprints, no public argument, no constitutional crisis, no press conference from a tearful Camilla, no statement from a defensive Charles. Just a flag on a London rooftop as the sun went down, and a brief press statement about a woman needing rest. But then, just as the day appeared to be drawing to a clean, sealed close, investigators reviewing the final pages of the audit documentation found something buried, something that, if it is what it appears to be, changes the entire picture of everything that happened that day. In the last section of the Box 11A dossier, a subsection the palace's internal review team apparently did not reach before locking down Camilla's network access, there was an anomaly, a discrepancy that should not have been there. Something that either slipped through the review process or that the review team noticed too late to stop. Because in the minutes just before William's security operation shut down the internal palace, servers and completely severed Camilla's access to the financial network, a final encrypted wire transfer was authorized and executed. A significant portion of those undocumented funds, the money that Catherine's announcement that morning was specifically designed to freeze, did not get frozen. It moved, and it did not move to a British bank account. It did not move to a domestic organization. It did not move to anywhere within the legal jurisdiction of the people who had spent the entire day carefully engineering this transfer of power. The routing data pulled from the final minutes of Camilla's access window pointed to a private offshore holding entity registered in Montecito, California. And if that geographic detail does not immediately mean something to you, let me just say the name out loud and let it settle for a moment. Montecito, the exact location where Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, have been living since they stepped back from royal duties and relocated to the United States. The receiving account, according to the server logs, is nested inside a financial structure connected to the Sussex Trust. I want to pause here, because this is the point in the story where confirmed events give way to implications that raise enormous questions. Questions that do not yet have clean, public answers. What the data shows is a transfer. What it does not automatically tell you is the full nature of the relationship behind it, the history that preceded it, or the full intent on either side of that transaction. But the implications are significant enough that they cannot be set aside without examination. Because if this financial connection is what it appears to be on the surface, it fundamentally rewrites years of carefully constructed public narrative about the divisions inside this family. Think about what the mainstream story has been, consistently for the past several years. Harry and Meghan on one side, the institution on the other. A very public departure, a memoir, a documentary series, interviews in which the family environment was described as cold, dismissive, and occasionally hostile toward them. Camilla was specifically mentioned in some of those accounts, and the portrayals were not flattering. The public understanding that took root and held firm was of genuinely opposing factions, opposing values, opposing interests, genuine hostility, and absolutely no meaningful communication between them behind the scenes. But what the Box 11A financial data now appears to suggest is something very different from that narrative. That while the public feud was being performed in interview chairs and book pages and documentary series, while the narrative of an irreparable family fracture was playing out in headlines across the world, there may have been a quiet financial arrangement running in the background, one that both sides found mutually useful, one that neither side had any interest in acknowledging publicly. Camilla needed an exit route for capital that could not remain inside the United Kingdom without being traceable, without being exposed by exactly the kind of forensic audit that was triggered on the morning of May 31st. The Sussex Trust is registered outside British legal jurisdiction, which means William and Catherine have zero oversight authority over it, zero ability to freeze it, audit it, or compel disclosure of anything held within it. From a purely structural standpoint, from the perspective of someone looking for a place to move money that cannot be reached by a palace-initiated financial investigation, it is the perfect destination. And that is the detail that makes this so deeply uncomfortable for the new power structure that William and Catherine spent all of May 31st methodically constructing. They executed a clean sweep domestically. Camilla signed the contract. The Privy Council session went ahead with a corrected ledger. The press received a health announcement that gave the public a tidy, uncontestable narrative. From every external angle, the operation appeared sealed, complete, and successful. But $12 million does not simply disappear. It went somewhere. And the somewhere, the specific, deliberate destination it moved to, is the one place they cannot reach. Whoever is holding those financial records right now, whoever has the routing numbers, the transaction logs, the documentation of where that money moved and precisely why, is sitting in a private estate in Southern California, outside UK jurisdiction, outside palace authority, outside the reach of everything that William and Catherine built over the course of that single carefully orchestrated day. That is not a minor administrative loose end waiting to be tied up at a later date. That is the entire leverage of the situation, quietly moved across the Atlantic before the door could close. Here is what keeps coming back. The more you turn this story over and look at it from every angle. The genius of what Catherine and William executed on May 31st was its invisibility. No public scandal, no constitutional drama, no fingerprints on the official record. The whole operation worked because it was contained, quiet, and completely deniable at every level. But that invisibility has a single critical condition. It only holds for as long as the evidence stays inside the building. The moment those records exist outside the institution, outside British legal jurisdiction, in the hands of people who have already demonstrated, publicly and on the record, a willingness to speak openly about their experiences with this family, the entire calculation shifts. Catherine can manage Camilla's public appearances going forward. She can approve every statement, schedule every engagement, and maintain the carefully constructed image of a queen consort on medical leave who poses absolutely no threat to the new order. But she cannot manage what Harry and Meghan choose to do with financial documentation connecting the Sussex Trust to $12 million that was supposed to be frozen by a palace-initiated audit. That is a story that, if it ever becomes public, does not just damage Camilla's remaining reputation. It raises fundamental questions about the audit itself, about what William knew and when he knew it, about whether the financial cleanup of May 31st was genuinely motivated by institutional integrity or whether it was a strategic operation dressed in the language of transparency. It opens every single door that the events of that day were specifically engineered to permanently close. So what we actually witnessed on May 31st, 2026 was not a clean resolution. It was a first move in something considerably more complicated, considerably more layered, and considerably less finished than it appeared to be when that health bulletin went out at 3:30 in the afternoon. The domestic power shift is real. Catherine's authority inside the palace is real. The flag raised quietly on the roof of Kensington at sunset was a genuine, deliberate signal of where this institution is heading and who is now directing it. But the most consequential piece of this entire story is not inside those palace walls. It is not in a signed contract sitting in a secure file in Catherine's office. It is not in the corrected ledger that the Privy Council approved that afternoon. The most consequential piece of this story is currently sitting offshore, outside anyone's control, in the hands of people with every reason, and very likely every ability, to use it at the moment of their choosing. The British royal family believes it closed the loop on May 31st. What they may not fully appreciate yet is that the loop has an opening they did not seal in time, an opening that exists beyond their reach, beyond their jurisdiction, beyond the elegant invisible mechanisms they spent years learning to operate. And somewhere in Montecito, California, someone knows exactly where that opening is, and they are in absolutely no hurry. And that is where we leave this story, for now. Because make no mistake, this is not over. The events May 31st were a beginning, not an ending. And the next chapter of this story is going to be determined not inside Buckingham Palace, not in a Wiltshire estate, and not in a Privy Council session, but in a private residence 3,000 miles away from London, by people who have already shown the world they are not afraid to speak. If this video kept you watching, first of all, thank you. Genuinely. It means a lot. Hit that like button right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps this channel reach people who need to be watching this story unfold. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because the follow-up to this video is already in production, and it goes places this one only hinted at. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know, do you think Harry and Meghan knew exactly what they were receiving? Or were they being used as a financial safe house without the full picture? Let's talk about it down below. Until the next cup of royal tea, take care.